Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I've just been trying to share the share the program with a few pages. We'd ask you to do the same. Certainly, many of you are already signing in, and so hope you're sharing it on your timeline and that you are sharing it on whatever page that you may have access to. And I see I left that speaker on, so let me reach over there and turn that off. And we're going to get started here in just a second. Please sign in. Let me know that you're here. Glad that you are with us tonight. Last week we did our broadcast from up in northwest Arkansas. And tonight we're back home in Nacogdoches, and we're glad to be home after a couple of weeks on the road. While you all are signing in and sharing the page, I want to emphasize that share the page or share the feed with your pages that you are members of, anywhere you think you can share it, where we'll have access tonight to as many folks as possible. Our views have been up between 500 and 600. It'd be great if we could get it up to 1,000. That doesn't necessarily mean that's how many people watch the broadcast all the way through, but it does mean that's that many people that we at least got them to stop and to pay attention for a few moments. So help me build the program and get it out there to as many folks as possible. We really enjoy doing the Bible studies, and you all seem to enjoy participating. Now, we have announced that we're going to finish up with our observations on the Sermon on the Mount and the home, and we want you to participate tonight by asking a question, or you're free to make a comment. Anything that you feel is relevant to our discussion. You can take us off topic if you want to, and we'll try and work it in as best we can. Just remember, we try to limit our discussion to things that are relevant to the Scriptures. That doesn't mean we won't talk about things that are going on every day or around us, or any number of issues that are currently being discussed, but we will only look at them from a biblical perspective. We're not interested in politics. We're not interested in controversy just for the sake of controversy or speculation. We want to see what the Bible has to say about these subjects. So if you're opening your New Testament back to the 5th chapter of the book of Matthew, there where we've been looking at the Sermon on the Mount, last week we finished up around verse 29 or so with consideration of the subject of adultery and divorce. And I think one of the very last questions we had was a question about how does divorce affect children, and that was a very good question. And we emphasized, and we want to begin the program tonight in that way, emphasizing the reality that God does not want divorce. Malachi 2:16 and 17 makes it clear that God hates putting away. So that's not his desire. Mark 10, in just stating the general marriage law, whoever divorces his spouse and marries another commits adultery. Only one exception. But Jesus doesn't mention the exception so we can all go looking for it, or create circumstances so intolerable in a marriage that we lay the stumbling block of adultery before our mate. What Jesus is trying to get us to understand is that marriage is permanent. There is only one thing that God is willing to consider, and that's because it is such a serious sin. And even that does not require the divorcing of a spouse, but it does require that we consider the reality that what we need in our marriages are boundaries. This is what is lacking for so many people today, is a respect for boundaries. Stop visiting with that old boyfriend or girlfriend. Stop looking at pornography. Stop mentally cheating on your spouse, but rather learn to be satisfied with their love and to cultivate their trust and to establish a marriage built on the foundation of love. Now, right after Jesus talks about adultery and the need to be faithful to one's marriage, then he goes on into the next section there, verse 33, and says, "You've heard said of them of old time, thou shalt not forswear thyself, but thou shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths." And then he goes into talking about the ways in which the Pharisees tried to create circumstances whereby they could circumvent a vow if they were to make one. So Jesus says, do not swear at all by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it's his footstool. In other words, everything's under the authority of God. And if you're going to swear, don't swear by the heaven or swear by the earth, because that's where God is. God is everywhere. God is always in authority. And so simply swearing by something which you think is less than God doesn't mean that your oath is not binding, because God is the ruler over all. And to swear by his creation is to swear by him. The Jews had a habit of swearing to validate their statements. And what Jesus is saying is you just need to be a truth teller. You don't need to have an oath to tell the truth. But then he goes on and talks about don't swear by your head or swear by your hair or to swear by anything. Why? Because none of these things are things that you can control or affect. So you can't swear by your head because you're not in control of your head. You can't turn your hair black. If I could do that, I'd turn my hair black, or at least back to that kind of red that it used to be. It's just, I can't make it black. I can't make it white. It is what it is. I don't even have any control over the hair of my head. It's getting to the point where I don't even have any control about where it grows, and I certainly don't have much control about where it stays. I got to have help to even keep it on my head. We don't need to be swearing. We just need to be telling the truth. Now, related to the family, we just talked about adultery. The man who's committing adultery or getting involved in adultery or carrying on secret conversations with an old girlfriend or meeting someone secretly for meals and other things, that and seeking to enter into an adulterous relationship, that person is lying. And when you keep your expenditures secret from your spouse, you're lying. Marriage is built on honesty. And so here Jesus is telling us that the Christian is a truth teller. Well, where is he a truth teller? He's certainly a truth teller in his relationship with his wife. He's a truth teller in relationship with his children, with his family members. The Christian is not a liar. Well, let's go on and look at some other aspects here of that. Ephesians 4:25, making that point about a Christian being a truth teller. Notice what the Apostle Paul says there, wherefore put away lying. Speak every man truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. It's the duty of a Christian to tell the truth to his brethren. Do you live with one of your brethren? Is your wife a Christian? Are your children Christians? Are you seeking to teach them to be Christians? Well, then, one responsibility you have is the responsibility of telling the truth. Now, before I get too far away here, I see that one of our listeners has asked the question, is there a distinction to be made between the concepts of putting away and divorce? The very simple answer to that is no, I do not believe there is a distinction to be made. Putting away is divorcing. And divorcing, marriage requires the taking of an oath, and that before witnesses, in some form of public declaration, whether it's the recording of the marriage certificate, it's the jumping over the broomstick, whatever it is, those things are required to establish the validity of a covenant in a community. Likewise, the undoing of a covenant requires some sort of ratification. So in our society, those who divorce, they have to file for the divorce, they have to get the judge to sign off on it, and then the decree is recorded. And so the undoing of a marriage is just as public and as forthright as the doing of a marriage. Now, the fact that the judge rules on it doesn't make it right. This is where a lot of people go haywire. So, well, if the judge rules on it, it must be right. No. God said only one reason for divorce, and whatsoever God has joined together, let not man, that's that judge, let not man put asunder. The only reason a judge in this country ought to be granting a divorce is because a man or a woman has been shown to commit adultery. But the reason why that's not being done in our society is because the burden of proof under our system of law for proving that is so high. And so the judges have just acquiesced to this no-fault divorce. Well, the fact that they rule and say, well, you can have a divorce, that doesn't make it right. So that's another question. Excuse me, that's not the COVID-19. So that doesn't make it right, but it's still the reality that the divorce and the putting away. So for a man just say, well, get out of the house, that's not a divorce. For someone to decide in their mind, I just don't love that person anymore and I'm not going to live with them anymore, and then somehow think that that's a divorce. No, it's no more a divorce than a man lusting after another woman by viewing a dirty picture or that sort of thing is committing adultery, the act of adultery. What Jesus was teaching was not that the looking at another woman is the act of adultery. Jesus was teaching that adultery begins in the heart. That's the point of that statement. But that's not adultery. And so likewise here, just thinking about it doesn't mean that it's a divorce, or people engaging in sex outside of marriage doesn't mean it's a marriage. Here's two young people in the backseat of an automobile. I don't mean to be ugly, but we know that's sinful, and they have sexual relations. Now, is that a marriage? Why, no, it's not a marriage. And so we understand that, and so the question is a good question, and some have tried to say, well, there's something less than a divorce that God recognizes. No, it's a divorce. It involves a public declaration or recording of the matter, just like the marriage does. All right, so I've talked about adultery, and I've answered another question on it, and now or divorce, and now we've looked at lying, and we've talked about how that being truthful is the foundation of all marriage relationship. Being truthful is what holds the family together. And we're not saying that the children ought to know everything that's going on. That's not the case. But a husband and wife need to be telling the truth to one another. And if you're not doing that, if you're not sharing those responsibilities, if your relationship is not so open that there is complete transparency in what you're doing, not only with your time, but with your money and your activity, if there's not complete transparency, then you have problems in your marriage that are going to result in bigger problems than what you're having right now. Now we go on there and notice that Jesus talks about retaliation and loving your enemies. And I think I've made this observation before, but I will certainly make it tonight, that this idea of tit for tat. Jesus tells us not to retaliate toward one another, and talks about the eye for the eye and so forth there in verse 38. You don't do that. You don't do that in your relationships with other people. You certainly don't do that in your relationships in the church. And you don't do that in your marriage. These husbands and wives who think, well, he did this to me, so I'm going to do this to him, whether it's ugly words or whatever it is. Somebody's got to be the Christian in the relationship and call a halt to that. Just because your husband calls you an ugly name doesn't mean you have to call him one. Just because he's shouting at you doesn't mean you have to shout at him. Those things have to be tamped down. And if one of you will behave as a Christian, then perhaps the other one will start to behave like he knows he should behave. So uncontrolled anger and retaliation, none of these things are to be tolerated in the marriage relationship. And so we need to turn the other cheek. We need to love our enemies. You know, let's talk about this a minute. Turn over there to Ephesians 5 and listen to me here. When Jesus, through the Apostle Paul, wants to talk about the church, he likens it unto the marriage relationship. And he says, wives, submit to your own husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be unto their own husbands in everything. So we have male spiritual leadership as the model for the family. And the husband is the head. That doesn't mean he's a tyrant, but it does mean he's the leader. And so the husband is the head, and the wife is to submit unto him as unto Christ. So when we're looking at a family relationship, the woman, the wife, she needs to learn to submit. She needs to learn to let her husband lead. She needs to learn to let him make the final decisions. Now, sometimes those are going to be bad decisions. They're going to be the wrong decision, and hopefully you as a wife can help him learn that. But arguing about it and fussing about it is not the solution to that. Helping him grow as a man and as a Christian is the solution to that. But the wife is in the capacity of someone who's following her husband, just as the church follows Christ. But now you men, I want to turn that around and get you to see something as well. So often we just talk about what the wife's responsibility is. But here, let me tell you something. The man's responsibility is a big responsibility. And so here, Paul says, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. What did Jesus do? Jesus marched right up Calvary, and they laid him out on that cross, and they nailed him to it, and he died for the church. Now, are you husbands living in such a way as that you're dying for your wife? You are called to suffer. You are called to give. You are called to sacrifice for your wife and your family. Notice what this section begins with there in verse 21. Submit yourselves one to another. The whole section is about submission. He talks about wives, he talks about husbands, he talks about servants, he talks about masters, all in the subject of submission. We are to submit to one another. Husbands, you submit by sacrificing for your wife, for your family, for giving yourself, for dying for your family. And you wives submit by allowing your husband to lead and encouraging him to lead in that way and loving him for leading in that way, having tender feelings for him because he's leading in that way. And I can tell you right now that one of the great reasons that so many families are in trouble is because there is a poor lack of manhood in our country. The idea of manhood is all about camouflage and deer scent and range and target control. There's more to being a man than shooting a gun and killing a deer or fishing or working with wood, a lot of other things. That's part of it. I'm not denigrating that. I'm just trying to get you to see that there's more to being a man than that. Being a man is leading. Being a man is laying down your life. Being a man is sacrificing for your family and their needs. Being a man is being a Christian. Being a man is following Jesus. Being a man is being true to your marriage vows. Being a man is nurturing your children in such a way as that they can see Christ living in you. That's manhood. And so Jesus over here in the Sermon on the Mount, he calls you to manhood. He calls you to sacrifice. Then Jesus goes on to say, there in chapter 6, after we've gotten through this section on love, what does it mean to love? It means to be like Jesus, to lay down your life. And then let me say this before I get too far off of that, which is really where I started going a moment ago, is the idea of loving your enemies. Jesus says love your enemies. Well, here's your wife, here's your husband, here's your children, here's your other family members, your extended family members. Love them. Love them. If nothing else, love them like you love your enemies. Why do we not comprehend this requirement to be the kind of person who loves other people, regardless of what they do? You're still called upon to love. Wives, regardless of what your husband does, you're called upon to love. Husbands, regardless of what your wife does, you're called upon to love. You've got to love them sacrificially, just like you love your enemy. turn the other cheek. We do a little more cheek turning at home, we might find that our relationships were better. Somebody might be sitting there and saying, boy, he's really railing on tonight. Well, I don't mean to be, but I tell you, I just see entirely too many families being ruined. People who are damning their souls because they won't learn to live together. We're going to have to do better than this. Well, now we're moving into chapter 6, as I said. If you've got any questions, this would be a good time to slip them in here. We've just had the one so far, but we're talking about the Sermon on the Mount. We're talking about Jesus. We're talking about the family, the responsibilities of husbands and wives. So certainly this may have some application to you tonight, and you might have a question. Now in chapter 6, Jesus is really talking about, he ends up the section they're talking about anxiety, that whole chapter. But he contrasts hypocrisy and anxiety. And he talks about prayer, and he talks about trusting in riches or where your treasure is. And he goes on to talk about almsgiving. That's where he begins, with almsgiving. And he's talking about that, though, in the context of, or putting it in the context of hypocrisy. Do not do your alms deeds to be seen of men. Do not pray just to be seen of men. Do not trust in riches instead of your heavenly Father. Lay not up for yourselves treasure. So all of these things there, fasting is in there as well. That's what I'm looking for. But it's the idea of hypocrisy. It's the idea of just practicing your religion to be seen and being more caught up in the things of the world. And then Jesus gets to the underlying issue there, which is the basis for anxiety. But the man who makes pretense of long prayers, the man who disfigures his face to be seen when he's fasting, the man who does his alms deeds to be seen of, that's just talking about hypocritical practice of religion. And somebody says, well, how does that affect the home? That affects the home because, in particular, with the rearing of children, what does Ephesians 6 say? And it's amazing to me how the book of Ephesians has so many themes in it that go back to what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. But there in chapter 6 it says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee and thou mayest live long on the earth. And Jesus deals with that in chapter 15 of the book of Matthew as well. And then he says in verse 4, fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. Let me tell you something. Children are very good at detecting hypocrisy. And if we're fake Christians, I don't want to wear that word fake out because it gets a lot of use these days, but if we're fake Christians and our religion is just external, it's just show, it's just pretense, who is it that's going to know that probably before anyone else knows it? Who's going to be able to detect that? Is it not the husband or the wife? Is it not the children? Do we not manifest that? And how does that affect them spiritually? Our responsibility as parents is to bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. But if we're really just fake Christians and we're more concerned about making money and having the things of the world and getting ahead, and we dedicate all our time to the pursuit of materiality, and we spend no time developing our character as Christians, we're not studying our Bibles, we're not helping our neighbors, we're not seeking to convert the lost. We're not doing anything other than showing up on Sundays, and maybe just once at that. We just show up on Sunday and then we're right back out there in the world. Is it any wonder that our young people leave the church? Is it any wonder that we have problems in our family relationships? Is it any wonder that we have no more influence on the world than we do? I mean, outside of our family, the next group of people that we have the most contact with in our culture today are those people with whom we work. Perhaps we're in a supervisory capacity, and so what Paul says here about servants and masters is very applicable in that relationship. But we can't influence our family, we can't influence the people that we work with, and we have little or no influence in the local church because we're just too busy. We don't have time to teach a Bible study. We don't have time to help the poor or to minister to the sick, to go out and visit, and I mean truly visit, see to the needs of those in the church who are suffering. We don't have time for any of that. But Jesus is describing the kingdom citizen in the Sermon on the Mount, and the kingdom citizen is not a hypocrite. And the kingdom citizen is not someone who's more concerned about his wealth. Jesus had mentioned earlier that you can't turn one hair black or white. Now when he gets down here to talking about materiality, he says, you know what? Not only can you not change the color of your hair, but you don't know how many of them you've got. And Jesus says the very hairs of your head are numbered. And that we are worth more than many sparrows, or ravens in this context, the birds of the field, or the lilies of the field. God takes care of them. Will he not take care of us? And yet what do? We consume ourselves in the pursuit of things, and the buying of things, and the holding on of things, and the clutching after things. And we don't have any money to give to the church because we're too busy with stuff. And again, how does that affect your family? What does that teach your children? What does that make your wife think about your concern for her spiritual well-being? Are you convincing her that you love her even as Christ loved the church? Christ died for her, and you can't even be the spiritual head of your family and lead your children and your family in Bible study. You can't get them to Bible study. You can't have time for prayer even around the dinner table. You can't make sure that you're reading the Bible with them and maybe helping them get up their Bible lessons, if that's something that you do. Have Bible study at the church where you have workbooks or something. Or what are you doing? And what are your children going to remember you when they're standing over your dead body, laying there cold in that casket? What are they going to remember about Daddy? What are they going to remember about Mother? Are they going to remember how you gathered them together and prayed with them? Are they going to remember how that you always made sure they were faithful to their responsibilities in the church? Did you set that example? Or are they going to remember you as someone who just was more concerned about things and you didn't know where the next day's dollar was coming from because you never had enough? See, these are important things to think about, and we need to think about them in a real context, a practical context. Jesus is not just talking here. Jesus is trying to transform our life. You know, you get old enough, and I'm not old enough, but I'm older. But I'm old enough to know this. You get old enough and you have some experiences in life, and if you've got any sense at all, and if somebody wants to argue with me about this would be a good time to take it up. But we know through experience we're not going to get out of this world alive. We're not going to take anything with us. That at the end of the day, it's just stuff. It is absolutely meaningless. That the only things that really matter in life are a good marriage and a rock-solid family that loves one another, and a relationship in the local church that is genuine and true and loving and kind, and that is helpful to getting our soul to heaven. Now, I really believe that. It took me a while to understand that, but that's just the truth of the matter. That at the end of the day, it's just all going to be burned up, and the only thing that's going to be left is you and the Lord Jesus Christ, and hopefully you'll be surrounded by your family, all of whom are faithful Christians, who are going to be waiting for the Lord to say, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Enter into the joys of your Lord." That's all I want to hear on Judgment Day is, "Well done. Well done." That's all that matters. And so Jesus talks about these things, and maybe you have a question about something specifically there. But verse 31, "Therefore take no thought, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or wherewithal shall we be clothed? For your heavenly Father knoweth that ye have need of all these. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." That, my friend, is the truth. Now here's a question before we get into chapter 7. How should the church deal with situations like you described in an unlawful divorce? Well, wherein you have a man who puts away his wife without the cause of adultery, or a woman who puts away her husband without the cause of adultery, we certainly should seek to encourage them to reconcile. And we want them to be saved. And it may well be that discipline from the church is what's necessary. Clearly, the person who does not repent of sin is to be disciplined by the church. But I want you to think about this reality. Does that mean that those people can't be saved? Is the only solution to their problem to undo? In 1 Corinthians 7, you have the situation of an unbeliever married to a believer, and Paul tells that person to be reconciled or remain unmarried. And if the unbeliever won't reconcile, there's not a thing in the world she can do about it. I think in that context, the unbeliever is the one who put her away. So yes, I believe when people willfully divorce, contrary to what the scriptures teach, they do several things. Let's just specify. First, they violate the command of God, because Jesus said, "Let not man put asunder." Second, they're guilty of laying the stumbling block one before the other. Notice, if you will, Matthew chapter 18, where, if I'm remembering correctly, because I had anticipated that someone might ask this question. Beginning there about verse 7. "Woe to the world because of offenses." Let me back up one more. Verse 6. "Whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, if it were better for him the millstone were hanged around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea." The word offend there doesn't mean you don't like my tie. The word offend means causes them to stumble, causes them to sin. When Jesus was talking about this back in chapter 5 of Matthew, he said that whosoever puts away his wife, except it be for the cause of fornication, causes her to commit adultery. So there's the laying of the stumbling stone. She's not guilty of adultery. He divorces her without the cause of adultery, and so he causes her to commit adultery. He lays before his spouse the stumbling stone of adultery. And if she marries again, whosoever marrieth her that's put away commits adultery. So in marrying again, she commits adultery. Or she may become a fornicator. And he himself may become a fornicator. He sets a stumbling stone before himself. He sets it before her. And so there's the sin of doing what Jesus said not to do, divorce. There's the sin of setting a stumbling stone between the one in front of the one who's not guilty of adultery. And then there is the persistence in that sin, and thus repentance, the need for repentance, the failure to repent. And when the Apostle Paul talked about a similar situation in the 1st and 2nd Corinthian letters, that he makes it clear that the brother who repented was to be received back, but not necessarily implying that not the one who has not repented should not be received back. I think I got that out. So I don't have any question about the necessity or the need or the correctness of the action to discipline a member who's divorced, contrary to the teaching of Scripture. However, I also believe that we ought to be patient and we ought to let people try and get their problems worked out. Marriage is hard. And marriage is really hard if you don't do what Jesus says to do. And so, but I don't have any problem with saying, yes, the church ought to discipline such a person, but not until they've given them adequate time and admonition to try and correct their problem. And each situation is going to be unique. So I'm only speaking in generalities here. That it's important to understand that. All right. Anybody else want to jump in here with a question real quick before I get off into Matthew chapter 7 and kind of wind this thing down toward an end anyway, as far as the Sermon on the Mount is concerned? I have some notes I've been looking down at here, and I let my pad close on me. But there at the beginning of chapter 7, Jesus talks about judge not that you be not judged. And most people don't have any clues what Jesus is talking about there. They'll quote that passage, judge not, because I've drawn the conclusion that a certain thing is contrary to Bible teaching. Or I've drawn the conclusion that they're practicing something that is sinful. Oh, you shouldn't judge. You shouldn't judge. Don't be the first, you shouldn't throw stones. And they completely misrepresent what Jesus says here. As a matter of fact, in the very context here, Jesus tells them to judge. There in verse 5, thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then thou shalt see clearly to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye. Jesus is not condemning their making judgments. He's condemning them making hypocritical judgments, judging someone else and they themselves have a similar or worse sin in their own life. It's rather humorous. Jesus talks about the mote, a little bitty speck, and he talks about the beam, a big plank, a 2x4 in the fellow's eye. He cannot see his own sin, but he's inspecting the minute sins in his brother. And he says, don't overlook your own, and then once you've got yourself cleaned up, then you can cast out the mote that's in your brother's eye. Then he goes on to the very next verse, give not that which is holy unto the dogs, neither cast your pearls before swine. Well, I've got to make a judgment about who's a dog and who's a swine. You see? And I've got to make a judgment about what is holy. Or what is a pearl. John 7:24, Jesus said, judge righteous judgment. Now, apply that to the family. Are we going to be hypocrites in our judgment of our spouse, of our children? Are we going to be the kind of parent or the kind of spouse who says, well, do like I say, not like I do? That's hypocrisy. And so we need to realize that. Well, another question popped up, and it takes us back to divorce. I can't get away from that, and that's okay, because I told you to ask your questions. But, and I need to click on this, because it looks like there's more than is showing up on the... It says this goes back to an earlier question. He mentions a brother here makes a distinction between putting away and divorce, and teaches putting away is wrong, but divorce is not. Yes, I've been trying to figure out what this brother believes on that. Question. How can one consider all biblical teaching regarding marriage, including the teaching of Christ in general, and specifically here in the Sermon on the Mount, and come up with such an idea? Well, you ask me how. I don't know how. You have to ignore the truth. What I have come to learn, Don, over the years is that when a fellow wants to get a divorce, he's going to figure out a way to do it. Now, if I understand, well, go ahead and say it. If I understand what Robert Waters is saying, because it doesn't matter to me, but if I understand what Robert Waters is saying, he's saying that people who do not get a legal divorce, it seems to me is what he's saying. And they who do not put away for in the right way divorce, they have to get the divorce. They just can't separate. In other words, here's a man and a wife, they separate, they go off, they're living in adultery or whatever it might be, and some common law marriage or perhaps just fornicating. And but then they get a divorce. They're freed by the law of the land from their spouse. What Brother Waters is objecting to is the idea that anybody could be bound to a covenant after a divorce has taken place. But clearly, Romans chapter 7 teaches that a woman is bound to her husband so long as he lives. That's what Romans 7 says. And if she be married to another man, she shall be called, and that's not saying that's just what people will call her, that's saying that's what she is. She shall be called an adulteress. So, she is an adulteress even though she's married to another man. So, it's possible to marry and yet be bound to a prior covenant. It's not that she's living in a relationship with that former husband. It is that God binds her to a covenant. Remember, when we looked at Malachi 2 last week, I believe it was, I made the point that in the formation of a marriage, the prophet Malachi says she is your wife by covenant. It's the Berith Yahweh. A similar covenant, though it has nothing to do with marriage, is spoken of in, I believe it's someone's going to have to check me out on this. I'm wanting to say 2 Kings. Oh, I can't remember right now. We'll have to look it up. I'll make a note to look it up. Maybe you can look it up. But when, I believe it was Zedekiah had made an oath of God to the king of Babylon, and then he reneged on that oath and sought aid from Egypt. So some of you guys out there who are picking up what I'm saying, find this for me. This is good for you, just as it is for me. That when he violated his covenant, when he didn't keep his oath before God, he had sworn to God that he would be loyal to Nebuchadnezzar, and then he made an agreement with the king of Egypt, then God punished him for not keeping his covenant. And the point is that he had made a covenant before God. And in not keeping that covenant that he had made before God, God said, I'm going to hold you to that. Same thing is true back in the book of Joshua, when the Gibeonites, I believe it was, came and made it look like they were from a far country. And they made a covenant with Israel. And then later they found out that they lived in the land. And God said, no, don't make a covenant with them. But then God said, don't you violate that promise either. You did what I told you not to do, but you made an oath and you swore your oath to me. And so now you're going to have to keep that oath. And so Israel was responsible for defending them against their enemies when the kings of the Canaanites came to destroy them because they'd made league with the Israelites. So the whole point of Romans 7 is you swear a oath before God, make a Berith Yahweh, a covenant of Jehovah. Then he holds you to the terms of the covenant. So when I swore to God that I would be faithful to my wife, forsaking all others until death do us part, that's exactly what God's going to hold me to. And if I violate that, I'm condemned. Now, what Brother Waters doesn't understand is that point. He thinks some judge sitting in a courthouse somewhere can rubber stamp some decision on the part of a couple to get to put one another away, and now that makes it all right, and they're both free to go and remarry. And I know of a specific case right now where someone has bought into that very teaching because they've been told that that was the case, or they've come to the conclusion that that was the case. And he and she were committing adultery, violating her covenant with the husband, And she turned around and divorced him, and the two of them have married, and they are convinced that they have the right to do that because of what Brother Waters has said. And I cannot find a single passage in all the book of God, Old or New Testament, that would allow that. Now, I'm sure that there are some fine points on that we could address, and maybe, Don, you and I can do that sometime when we're together, but the reality is I cannot find anything like that in the Scriptures whatsoever. It's one man for one lifetime with one exception. And then when that exception is present, it is only the person who is not guilty of adultery or fornication that is given any right to remarry. And I'm willing to defend that from the Scriptures. All right, where I was moving on in chapter 7, but if y'all want to keep dragging me back over there to those divorce questions, I'll be happy to answer them. So we talked about hypocrisy. And then we talked about censorious judgment. Do like I say, but not like I do. How do you think that helps your family or hurts your family? And then this is a good point that I wanted to be sure and get in tonight. These words of Jesus here in 7 through 12 of chapter 7, where he talks about seek and knock and ask, and it shall be open to you. For everyone asketh, receiveth, and so on and so forth. And then he says in verse 9, what man is there of you whom if his son ask bread, will he give him a stone? Or if he ask a fish, will he give him a serpent? Parallel passage says, if he asks for an egg, you give him a scorpion. If then ye being evil know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your Father which is in heaven give good things to them that ask him? What we need to learn about that for the family is approachableness. I made this point last night in giving the invitation over at Stallings, that the reason why the prodigal son was willing to come home to his father, it was the goodness of God. That was the point I was making. The goodness of God leads us to repentance. And this son reflected about something in his father. What did he remember? He remembered the grace of his father. Even the servants had more than enough. And it was the mercy. He says, I will arise and I will go and I will say to my father, I have sinned. He was confident that when he went back to his father, he was going to find mercy. So many times Jesus teaches us this lesson, and we as fathers in particular, and I'll be the first one to admit, raise my hand and admit, I have not always done this. But we need to learn to be approachable. We need to learn to try and be merciful. We need to be compassionate toward our wife, toward our children. Likewise, the wife and the children need to learn the same thing. There needs to be plenty of mercy going around. You know, when I say that, I'm reminded of Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 32. Yes, there it is on this other page. Be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. That's what we need, is some compassion and some mercy and some loving kindness, some tenderness, some understanding. And so Jesus, in teaching us there in Matthew 7 about asking and knocking and seeking, what he's teaching us is that God is approachable, and you as a father need to be approachable. You as a mother need to be approachable. You as a husband who's the head of your wife needs to be approachable. And the wife, she needs to have those tender feelings and compassion toward her husband, because we're going to make mistakes. We're going to sin. I said this marriage thing was hard, and it's really hard if there's not any compassion or any mercy or any forgiveness ever to be found in the relationship that exists within the family. It's just going to be unbearable. And this is why families are destroyed, is because folks aren't trying to be like the father. We're not being like the son. We're not willing to be nailed to that cross and sacrifice ourselves for our family. All right, you got a few more minutes to get that last question on marriage and divorce in. Let me see where I am here in chapter 7. And then verse 13, enter at the straight gate. Well, just from a practical standpoint, where do we all need to stay in the narrow way. And where does our family need to be? We need to be in the narrow way. We need to teach our children that when we say no, there's a reason for no. It may be because I said so. Sometimes that is a good reason. But really, our children need to understand that our judgments, our decisions, our direction of the family has as its number one objective staying in the narrow way. You know, when your mother used to, you'd come in and say, Mom, can I go do thus and such? And she says no. And then the next thing out of your mouth, well, Johnny is doing it. And you remember what your mother said? My mother used to say this to me. She says, well, if Johnny was jumping off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge? Now, what was Mother's point? Mother's point is we're not following everybody else. We're not doing what everybody else is doing. We're not lining up on the bridge or the broad way and jumping in just because somebody else is jumping. We're following Jesus. We're not following Johnny. And so when you came in and you asked Mom and Dad, could you go to that dance? And they said no. And you said, well, Susie's going or Bobby's going or all the kids. No, but we're not all the kids. Well, so-and-so's folks said they could. Well, you see, is so-and-so's folks trying to follow Jesus? We're not going to be drinking. We're not going to be dancing. We're not going to be going to smutty movies. We're not going to be doing a lot of things that people in the world do because we're trying to follow Jesus. We're trying to follow Jesus. And so we're going to stay in the narrow way. And then right after that, Jesus talks about the wise man and the foolish man. Building a house. The wise man in the book of Proverbs talks about a woman who pulls down her house with her own hands. She's a fool. Talking about the foolish woman. We're building a house. We're building a family. Where are we going to build our family? We're going to build them on the rock. Who is the rock? Jesus is the rock. So where are you and I going to build our family? What are we going to make the foundation upon which we're going to stand? Well, we're going to make that Jesus, but and we've got to follow Jesus, and we've got to follow the course of wisdom, and we've got to do things that are wise. And what are those wise things? Well, whosoever keepeth my Father's commandments. You see, we want to make the tree good. We want to follow the true teacher. And so in order for the tree to be good, in order for the family tree to be good, where's the family going to be? The family's going to be in church. The family's going to be listening to preaching. The family's going to be doing Bible study. The family's going to be following Jesus. The family's going to be listening to the preacher and to the elders, and we're going to be opening our Bible, and we're going to be seeing what things are true. And a good father and a good mother will teach their children to look in the Bible for these answers. And if they start to challenge us, what we need to do is say, well, you find it in the Bible, and we'll talk about it. You find out what the Bible says on that. My mother used to do that with me. Well, is that what Jesus would want you to do? Why don't you go find that? Why don't you go come tell me what Jesus wants you to do? These are the kinds of things that we need to be doing with our children. In Deuteronomy, I believe it's chapter 6, we're told to teach it in the way, rising up and laying down. We're to be writing it on the walls and the doorposts. We're to be taking every opportunity. That's what Moses is saying. We're supposed to be taking every opportunity to teach our children the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ and to help them to learn to make the appropriate applications of divine truth to their situations. so that they can have their own faith, so that they can be people of faith. There's not anything more beautiful than a young man or a young woman who has faith in Christ and knows why they have faith in Christ and can demonstrate that faith. And so they're building their house on the rock, or as the psalmist says, they have planted themselves as a tree beside the river. And it's going, and that's what Jesus says here. He wants us to be a good tree. Well, where's that good tree planted? It's planted by the river of life. That good tree is bearing good fruit because it's being taught, nurtured, nourished with the Word of God, the water of life, the bread of life. And that's what we want for you. That's what we want for everyone. And then Jesus says there at the very end, it says, not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven. We want to be the one who enters into the kingdom. We want to be the one who's seeking first the kingdom. There's the priority of a family. There's the family that's going to go to heaven. You know, I'll end with this tonight. I've kind of had a romantic notion all my life. I've kind of left it off just simply because I know it's not practical. But 6 generations of my family are buried out in western Oklahoma, and they were all Christians. Then I've got some up here in East Texas that go back further than that. 11 generations of my family have been Christians. And I used to think, well, I'd like to be buried out there in that cemetery with my mom and my daddy, my grandma, my grandpa, my aunts, and my uncles. Those who I never even knew that are buried there. Why? So on glory, I could wake up with my family, surrounded by my family who love God. And we could enter into glory together. And that's what I want you to do as a family, to enter into glory together. Well, we're out of time. We appreciate you being with us tonight. We will be back here next Thursday at 7 p.m. Thank you very much.